Thanks to Shopify for supporting Future Hindsight. Shopify is a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs like myself the resources once reserved for big business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. And if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work that we do as an independent pro-democracy podcast, join the Civics Club on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Future Hindsight now. Welcome to Future Hindsight, a podcast on a mission to spark civic action. I'm your host, Mila Atmos. I'm a global citizen based in New York City, and I'm deeply curious about the way our society works. So each week, I bring you conversations to cut through the confusion around today's most important civic issues and share clear, actionable ways for us to build a brighter future together. After all, democracy is not a spectator sport. Tomorrow starts right now. After the 2024 presidential election, we know that the Democratic Party needs a hard reset. But how? To tackle this question, we're joined by one of the most strategic minds in the Democratic Party, Faiz Shakir. He's the executive director of More Perfect Union, formerly ran the Bernie 2020 campaign, served as the ACLU's national political director, and also served as senior advisor to the late Senator Harry Reid. Welcome, Faiz. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So I feel like I should begin with something a lot of people who are lifelong Democrats are asking themselves after the defeat in 2024. Why are you still a Democrat? And, why not build a new party?
Well, most functionally, there are two major political parties in America. And the way the American democracy works is you're going to have to operate within one or the other in order to have any influence or power. It requires being in a team sport to get things across the legislative finish line. It's very hard for an outsider, independent, third-party person to have influence with the way the current structure operates. Secondly, the Democratic Party has a whole long historical lineage of being a working class party. If you go back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, some of the proudest accomplishments of the Democratic Party to this day, we still tout them, of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These come from Democratic efforts. And it's that return to our roots that we're hunting for. I often say, especially in light of the Doge stuff that we're witnessing now, imagine if I came to you and I said, hey, listen, Mila, I found a senator in the United States who is corrupt. And they've got gold bars. His name is Bob Menendez. And you know what we should do? Abolish the United States Senate. You're like, wait, what? Like, I got one part. Why are we abolishing the whole thing? No, the point is to reform it, to make it better, to make that system functional. And that's the way I feel about the Democratic Party.
All right. Well, that's well put. Speaking of Senator Goldbars, I have to tell you that we make fun of Senator Menendez all the time at home. But also, I have to tell you that I have a good friend who was, a big donor to Democrats in New Jersey. And when the story first broke, she was in total denial, And I feel like that's kind of how a lot of Democrats feel right now, where a lot of Democrats are in denial about what happened, about the state of the party. And you actually have many ideas on how to repair the Democratic Party brand and to return to its working class roots. But I'm not quite sure how we get there. And I want to know more about your vision. You ran sort of last minute for DNC chair and changed the conversation. But I'm not sure how much the conversation has changed in the last few weeks, or the last few months and going forward. But tell us about your vision.
It's going to be a painful struggle, and I own it. Injustices are what drive me. If things were very nice and normal, then I would probably be going off and coaching baseball right now or doing something else with my life. But it's the fact that there are these massive injustices that keep me going. And I see them within the Democratic Party right now. If you look at the North Star, what are we trying to get to? Just being a populist working class party means associated with people. If I asked you right now, said, hey, you're a Democrat, what is required of you? Is anything required of you? Are you part of any kind of movement? Do you do anything besides give $20 of a contribution every now and again? No, right? The meaning of a Democrat is so broken. People are not involved in our operation. And so one of the reasons I ran and one of the things I try to fight for is reconnecting with actual people out in the world, building a movement. This is why we helped run the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's a of people, by people, for people. And to be a DNC member, to be a Democrat, should mean that you're part of some civic organization, particularly as we've seen the decline of civic organizations, particularly on the left of center, right? This has been intentional design by the right. They are attacking campus organizing. They are attacking unions. They're attacking any kind of place where, left of center people could gather. Meanwhile, they are building up churches, homeschool associations, gun clubs to do a lot of organizing in their own rights. So in my view, a working class party is associated with workers. Where are they right now? If you're an Amazon driver, if you're an Uber driver, if you're a Dollar General worker, if you're a Walmart worker, you don't get any retirement. You're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Your healthcare, to the extent it exists, probably, is terrible, or you're on Medicaid. Those are the people whom we fight for. They are our base. They are our core, and we have to associate with them, open the doors to them, and let them help guide our vision of the kinds of things we fight for and who we take on, namely corporate power. And right now, those folks that I just mentioned, they're probably not even Democrats. They're probably not even in the party. They probably don't even know how they would be allowed to join this elite club. And that's what I'm trying to change the notions of.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're probably familiar. We had Theda Skocpol on, I think I want to say last year. And she wrote about how in the heyday of the labor movement, there were union halls, and these were your community centers, right? You would go there every Sunday. You would go there for every, post-prom party or whatever it is, birthday parties. And you would play cards. You would go there after work. You would have a beer, all of these things. But these things are missing. And I don't know how the Democratic Party would rebuild something like this or build from scratch.
Can I give you a story about this? Because when I was
us.
running for the DNC chair, I would call a lot of the state parties and I would bounce a few ideas past them. And I'll tell you one that I would often offer that they didn't actually like. And it was interesting and instructive to me. So I said, this was, let's say, 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. And I said, hey, what if we together hosted Super Bowl watch parties? And to be fair, some of them liked the idea, but a number of them did not. And they would tell me, to their credit, they would tell me, I don't like that idea. We got bigger fish to fry. We've got to fight Donald Trump. And I'm like, right. I got you. We got to fight Donald Trump. But I want to fight it with people. And I want people to be associated with us. So you tell me what better way. I'm not going to sit here to tell you that I have the best idea and that holding a Super Bowl watch party is the best idea in the world. But you give me other ones in which we draw people in the doors, working class people in the doors, to just associate with us without having to preach or tell them, here's what we are, here's what we're doing, you got to join us. But instead make the barrier to entry low. Have a nice union hall or a nice gathering spot, free food, free beer, and say, we want to associate with you. And the resistance I got, which is interesting, is that I can sense at the end of the day, they felt it was an imposition of, I would have to do a lot of work to manage all these volunteers, right? 200 people would join us at this. I got to now be an event organizer. I got to get stuff going for them. I don't have the resources and people on the staff to handle all of these. I'm like, fair.
Right, that's the thing, though, right? That's the thing with organizing. You got to have volunteers and have people join in, and that's kind of what it is.
Right? That's the choice, or not, right? You can say, I'm going to make 10 calls to wealthy people, raise money, fund the state party, have like 10 people on staff, and that's what we're going to do all day long and try to win an election. Or you can associate with people and figure out those barriers to entry and make them part of your mission.
Yeah. Well, because if you're a Democrat now, and really, I don't know what it is to be a Republican, right? And in terms of, the Democratic.
Well, look, on that point, let's just stay with just very briefly on Trump, right? If I were to tell you that, MAGA movement is a real thing. If I sent you to any city in America and I said, hey, do you think that there's likely a MAGA contingent here with whom you could associate? The answer is yes, right? In that way, there is actually civic organization and movement orientation around his side.
Yeah. Well, I know that if there's a Trump rally, people line up for days beforehand, not just the day of, and they basically have a party while they're waiting, and they are together and they make friends and they go again. And it's sort of like, it's like going to a Grateful Dead concert. I think that's the way that I perceive it from the outside.
When I was running the Bernie campaign, we felt and believed this deeply that, the rally is not just, hey, come and watch Bernie Sanders speak. It's a community event at a time when people don't have a lot of opportunities to gather with people of different socioeconomic status or like-minded socioeconomic status. And when we did it right, we would have musical performers at every event, right? We would have other interesting and compelling entertainment and, speakers, and we would think about it as a community gathering. That was fundamental to the notion. It wasn't just like a political speech. It was a gathering of people. And we've gone and talked to More Perfect Union, talked to a lot of Trump supporters who go to these MAGA events. And when you ask them about Donald Trump, some of them are diehard, love him, think he's the greatest thing in the world. But some will concede to you, listen, he's kind of a crime boss. I don't like his morals and his values on this thing or that thing. But I'm here and I love this because I love being here with my friend Mila or other people around me. They come, so I come. We come together. We enjoy this together. It's part of definitionally. Bernie Sanders would often tell me that, Faz, there's a number of people who are probably going to get married, because they came and either met each other through Bernie events or worked together as volunteers on Bernie events. And it mattered to him that we were a form of bringing together folks who are finding each other and building association.
Oh, I love that. Well, tell us about how you came to run the Bernie campaign, because you previously worked for Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. So the jump to actually not only be for Bernie, but run his campaign is not really necessarily obvious.
Well, so I first met Bernie through, my opposition to the Iraq War. I was a young person. I was 22 years old, I believe, graduating from college. And I learned that there are not many Democrats who are vociferously opposed to that war. I ended up working for one of them, Senator Bob Graham of Florida, who was a Senate Intelligence Committee chairman at the time and opposed the war. But I learned that this guy, Bernie Sanders, was speaking so, morally about the injustice that I saw. And I felt like often a minority in my own country in which the majoritarian sentiment was, let's just go to war with Iraq. And it's like, this doesn't feel right or is right. And then here's a person in power and influence who sounds sane to me, who is like making the moral and virtuous cause. So at that point, that's when I first got introduced to him, and I tracked his entire life. As you mentioned, I then go and work in the Senate for Senator Harry Reid, and I get to know Senator Sanders. I get to know his staff. He gets to know me. And I think what he learned and realized about me was among the Senate leadership staff. At the time there's 4 senators at the top of the leadership. They were Schumer, Harry Reid, Patty Murray, and Dick Durbin. And all their staffs, I was the only one of the whole group that supported Bernie Sanders' run for president in 2015, 2016. And he knew that of me, and I was very proud and avowed. And Harry Reid knew that about me. He's like, yeah, you love Bernie, and that's great. So during the course of that campaign, he ended up reaching out to me and saying, hey, would you be able to help me and give me some thoughts and advice? And I was more than happy to do that. So over a period of time, by the time he runs again in 2019, 2020, he called me, early on in that campaign, said, I would like you to be my campaign manager, which, how do you turn that down? And so I was like honored to do this and still am. I'm, to this day, still a chief political advisor to him.
Oh, amazing. Well, let's do a little bit of a post-Bernie race. You founded More Perfect Union, a progressive nonprofit newsroom that tells the stories of working class Americans by covering politics, policy, labor, business, and economics news through a class lens. So your mission is to build power for the working class. And on your website, this sentence really struck a chord with me. Quote, our work seeks to embolden and empower the working class to engage in building our democracy for the betterment of all working Americans, end quote. Tell me, why will our politics be better off by centering the working class?
In a world of massive wealth and income inequality, tens and tens of millions of people are robbed of their voice in both politics and the economy because those who are well connected with money, with resources, with lobbyists, with accountants, with lawyers have the inordinate sway over everything in the economy and everything to do with politics. And the purpose, if you just dial it back from them, of politics itself is to think about the greater good, the common good of all people. It isn't to operate for profit. isn't to operate for the benefit of Elon Musk or Donald Trump and what their ideological whims are, but to think about, a Medicaid program that helps all people, Medicare that helps all people, Social Security helps all people, national parks helps all people. That notion of for all, which is embedded in the Bernie Sanders campaign, right? Medicare for all, canceling student debt for all, all kinds of programs that we offered across the board were for all. That class lens is critical, and it's missing in society, particularly as we have one that is more dominated by increasing wealth and income inequality gaps. And it becomes more, conducive for people to say, hey, if I can't beat the wealthy class, I might as well try to join the wealthy class. And you see this kind of revolving door in politics, a lot of attraction from those who either work in politics or the economy to kiss up, right? And you see this with Elon or in Trump. How many people want to fly to Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring? How many CEOs want to say, hey, I'm your nice buddy? What's getting lost in that shuffle? Tens and tens of millions of workers, and their voice, their power is everything. And I felt through More Perfect Union, one of the jobs that we can do of service is like, you have all these workers who take incredible acts of economic courage. They go on strike or they organize their workplaces, and yet nobody knows at the national level sometimes that it's going on. And if we could just build a media outlet that showcased their actions and gave them the microphone to tell them in their own words why they're doing what they're doing, it would be mobilizing to hell of a lot of people. And I think I saw that most acutely during the Starbucks organizing wave, where we say, okay, we'll cover a couple of these stores in Buffalo. And they organized. But yet what we saw was when we covered a couple of stores in Buffalo organizing, hundreds and hundreds of stores all across America took heart, learned, gained wisdom from their efforts and said, we can do this too. And that to my mind is the point and the power of building power for working people.
Well, tell me about what you learned about working class people, people who follow More Perfect Union, the American electorate writ large, in doing More Perfect Union. What have you learned in this process of reaching out to them and being basically in the trenches with them every day and delivering news and stories to them?
So ideologically diverse people who have all kinds of different views, they're America, right? So they may feel differently on a whole sets of issues like abortion or racial justice issues, immigration issues, like the kaleidoscope that the polls tell us about America. But what I found, and increasingly what frustrates me, annoys me, is that if you think about the core economic justice issues in this nation, everything from a social safety net, which we've talked about, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but also the desires to have a tax system that rewards working class people over the wealthy. When you think about issues like paid leave, raising the minimum wage, you think of taking on corporate power through antitrust laws, basic child care expansion, all of those things have like 70, 80+% approval. There's a huge broad swath of common ground, commonality of not only building power for working people, but taking on corporate power in aggressive and meaningful ways. And it's frustrating to me that commonality is not represented in our politics, right? We are often finding ourselves in divisions around other issues, polarizing our electorate. And why is that? Because a wealthy class, so you take the top 10% of America who owns vast amount, 90% plus of the wealth, that they don't find it in their interest to have like a whole populace that is aligned around the commonalities. And so they often find ways through a political consultant class, the way we campaign in for elections is to divide people up. And I have found over the course of these years, we've done More Perfect Union content on basic corporate accountability issues. Our top referrers on YouTube, right? The people who watch our channel also watch Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Fox News. That's what this algorithm tells us. They're also going to those places. So it tells me you're reaching people, working class people who don't always vote with you, don't always agree with you ideologically, but find that the content that you're doing speaks to them. Especially when we're doing economic justice, core issues. That exists. That's out there. There is a 70, 80+% commonality among us.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. When you were talking about people in the top 10%, let's say, I think there is a sense among them that if there were Medicare for all, that would take away from them.
Right.
And so I had a conversation with somebody recently about minimum wage. And I said, we really need to raise the minimum wage. And well beyond $15 an hour. Like, you cannot live on $15 an hour. That's $30,000 a year, and you cannot live anywhere in the United States on $30,000 a year. It doesn't matter where.
Right.
And this person was really pushing back, and this person was a rich person, okay? So I said, listen, I promise you, you will still be rich, even if this person makes more money. And I kind of feel like this is totally lost. But how do you think about that? How do you talk about that with people so that they buy in? Because I find that this is, when I have these conversations, I feel like I'm just, running against a rock.
And they're not crazy. Like, the first thing is to acknowledge and understand if you're in the top, let's say 10%, 5%, the economy is working great for you. It is working great for you. Your healthcare is pretty damn good. Your wages, your income is good. You maybe even be a passive income earner. And you know what I mean by that, right? People who live
Yes.
off the stock market, they don't maybe sit behind a keyboard, but they don't have to get out delivering Amazon boxes to make a living. And what you're trying to argue for is solidarity, is the sense that our society has to, in order to exist and subsist for future generations, for your kids, my kids, our kids, like grandkids, our society, our democracy is going to have to exist if there's economic freedom, economic liberty within it, such that people right now who make $30,000 a year could see that their kids would grow up making $80,000, $150,000 a year, that there's economic opportunity for them. And right now, we're getting very scarily close to situations in which you have serfdom, right? People who are in the bottom 50% stay in the bottom 50%. And that is not a recipe for a democracy that works well. That bottom 50% has been stagnating now for close to 50, 60 years. And we wonder, why are people so angry and so frustrated, so upset? Well, it does require a sense of solidarity, that a system that works best is a system that takes care of all of us. Public schools for all people, those basic notions work best. And that we should have wealthy people invested in the notion of these common good items. Like, stop thinking about vouchers and moving your kids from public schools to your special private school. Invest back into a public school to make it the best it can be, and recruit the best teachers, increase the ability to give funding to some of these schools, raise the teacher pay, right? Those are things that I want to urge some of the wealthiest in our society to feel that that's a heavy responsibility on all of us, and especially them to feel this society cannot last for generations and generations if we continue to mire 50, 60% living paycheck to paycheck into a place of completely deprived economic liberty and freedom of movement. We've seen this playbook before in human history. We have to start caring about the ways in which we make government function. I think related to that is this issue that people feel cynical about government. And that's what I worry most about. Is like, well, these are all fine, good ideas, but I can't trust that government would be able to execute on a well executed raising of the teacher pay across the country, really good public schools, really good child care centers from pre-K3 pre-K4 all the way up, or Medicare for all. Can I trust that you could even execute this? And they're right to say that we've had a degradation of government quality of service, but that doesn't mean, to the earliest point that I raised with you, right, when I started this call, you don't give up on it.
Right.
You don't give up on Democratic Party. You don't give up on government. You say, you acknowledge the need for reform and you push for that high bar.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said just now. And one question I have about solidarity is around identity politics. I personally feel like identity politics divides us. Although, of course, I get the appeal of people talking about their lived experiences. It's different if you're a white man or if you're an Asian woman like myself. But what we're losing is the ability or the will to defend good ideas on the merits, which is what you just did, right, on public education. But for example, there's this feeling that just because I'm not working class, I'm not allowed to stand in solidarity with working class people. Like, it's a purity test, and it comes from all sides, from above and below. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I would put it differently. I'm not saying, in my view, and I could be wrong, but I don't know that people feel like I'm not allowed to stand in solidarity. What I worry more about in the identity politics realm is that, JP Morgan or government of the United States or Goldman Sachs has said, oh, I see that you Black Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, you feel like you're being disrespected. So I will give you one seat on the hiring committee. I will let you wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on Tuesdays. I will give you a prayer room in this particular place. And it will give us the false sense that you've accomplished something. I've won. We got something because we organized. Like JP Morgan, the CEO has taken a knee in solidarity with us. Like nonsense. That it hasn't accomplished the thing we needed for tens of millions of people. It has distracted us. It has actually divided us from each other. Instead of finding that Black Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, white Americans all gathered together and said, we need freaking healthcare. We need higher wages. We need a union. We need retirement. They said, no, how about you get a spot on the diversity committee? You got your own diversity committee and you can help inform what we do here at this firm. Like, no, that's not it. And so I find these, to your point, I like, people bringing their identity to mission, to program. What is a goal that we can accomplish in which you bring your own experience as a Native American to help us build a grassroots organizing operation, help us build a movement to raise the minimum wage. But I don't like us arguing that because, let's say I'm Native American, I just want my own particular seat at this particular table and feel that if I got that seat, I came, I saw, I conquered, I got what I needed. Because that has distracted you from the real big missions and aims that bond all of us together.
We'll be right back with Faiz Shakir, so stay with us. You'll love this episode's Civic Spark. One small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, when you think about the most successful businesses, those brands with sales going through the roof like Gymshark or Alo Yoga, I'm sure you think about a great product and a cool brand with brilliant marketing, right? But let me tell you the super special ingredient that makes selling and for shoppers buying simple. It's the businesses behind the business, because you just cannot do it all alone. For millions of businesses, that business behind them is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, and let me tell you why. Shopify is home to the #1 checkout on the planet. And there's this little secret that's not so secret, Shop Pay. That boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way fewer carts going abandoned and way more sales going cha-ching. So, if you're into growing your business, and I'm willing to bet you are, then your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. And that's why businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level, no matter how big you want to grow. And that's what I love about Shopify. Upgrade your businesses and get the same checkout Gymshark uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/hopeful to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/hopeful. And now, let's return to my conversation with Faiz Shakir. Well, tell us a little bit about the politicians who we have elected to get us there, because I feel like a lot of the Democratic Party politicians, but this is across the board, of course, also Republicans, are captured by corporate interests or captured by wealthy donors, right?
Yes.
So I don't know how we get there.
Well, think about all the different ways. First of all, like when you say captured, and a lot of people think of like the most obvious ways in which they give a campaign donation to you. And that right. certainly plays a major role.
I mean, look at Elon Musk. He gave $200 million. That's a primo example. But, there are people who give... There are people who give $100,000, right? That's which is also some people, many people don't make $100,000 a year.
Yes. And I would say in addition to that, there are other corrosive ways that we see money playing out in its influence. One is the most obvious way is that you see these staffers who either worked in government or on campaigns, and they know that the second those things are over, they're going to hunt money from very wealthy people and have to make a living doing something else, and therefore use their positions of power and influence at the time to not take on those powerful actors, because they want to make it clear to them, hey, I need that job at the end of the day. I'm coming out of here, I'm coming out of government, I'm coming out of this campaign, and I want you to know I'm not your enemy. I want you to hire me. So that's one corrosive element. The other corrosive element I've seen is that, people own stocks, and members of Congress. It's one of the least talked about corrosive ways in which moneyed
Oh,
influences
it's talked
happen.
about. We
Yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, but not
I
enough.
mean, I talk about it in my house.
Right.
Let's put it
Not
that way.
enough to understand that, like, regular people out there may not fully appreciate just how, member of Congress who has like
I mean, for the
Amazon.
record, I want to say here on Instagram, there's somebody that my teenage son follows who follows, members of Congress's portfolios and then puts them on Instagram so you
Right.
can
That's great.
replicate their portfolio.
That's great. But like the way in which that affects then their decisions to vote for or against or bring pieces up, I've seen it all over the course. We were fighting for rail workers to get paid sick leave. How many people were invested directly or indirectly in the transportation sector and rail sector or Buffett's enterprises, whatever, that it affected the psychology of people. Oh, you're going to hurt the market, therefore you're going to hurt my portfolio, and therefore you're going to hurt my own personal wealth. And so one of the ways I've long believed, I mean, I'm not trying to get everybody out of the stock market entirely, just move them into index funds, right? You're invested in America. You just like, hey, you ride up and down with all of us. That's okay. But you don't stock pick. You don't get to say, oh, Boeing. Yeah, I'm all the way in on Boeing. And I'm not sure I want to support the workers when they're on strike. I'm not sure I want to engage in very tough criminal investigations of them when the doors fall off their airplanes because, it might affect my portfolio. So everything you're saying is correct. There's so many different ways, in my view, where power and money influence the system through staffing, through portfolios, through direct contributions, and generally just the whole campaign apparatus of how people get their information, which is a big one. Like if you take a lot of the media right now, a lot of the major beltway media, I'm in DC. If you look at some of the major publications, they're sponsored by, big pharma, big oil. They then host events with members of Congress in which those lobbyists are there to speak and given an opportunity directly to contribute their thoughts into members of the media and to members of Congress. And I often ask this of many members of Congress, how do you get your inputs? And if you circle back to the first point that I was raising, when you're not a working class party, when you don't have regular people like associated with you, who ends up giving you your inputs? Wealthy
corporations.
donors. Yeah,
Yes.
corporations and wealthy donors, right?
Yes.
They have a particular point of view, and you don't have a way to balance. You don't have any other mitigating factor of how best to say, what would other people think? Well, you don't know any other people. You don't have any connections to other people.
Yeah. Many members of Congress are reluctant to have town hall meetings and
Right.
really meet constituents where they are, And if they do hold them, it's always the same people who show up with the same grievances. So it's a little bit of, we need to buy in and they need to show up.
Yeah, and I, as a Democrat, I'm like, I welcome disagreement. It feels like we have a politics sometimes that, especially on the center left, where it's like, if you disagree with me, somehow you're a terrible human being. Like, no, democracy is messy. You're supposed to have disagreement. People listening to this may say, hey, I didn't like what he said about identity politics. And I'm like, that's fair. And I will respect you despite you feeling something different than I feel. And that is how a mark of a good and healthy democracy, a good and healthy organization functions, is that we move forward despite disagreements. Not that we don't have any disagreements, that we manage through disagreements in order to make decisions together.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of corruption within politics, one of the things that I've heard a lot is that we should be supporting labor unions. If you're not part of a union, join a union, something like this. But there is a common notion that the labor movement is corrupt. People say things like union bosses are corrupt and they practice favoritism. If you're not on the inside, you don't get a job. Or unions vote for politicians, and this is, I hear from people on the right, unions vote for politicians and support their campaigns in order to get better contracts.
Right.
So what's your answer to these grievances? And I think in some instances, of course, that's real.
Yes.
There have been union bosses that were corrupt in the past. This is not news. How do you answer that?
So first off, the structure of a union, absolutely functionally critical. I mean, we're talking about the massive wealth and income inequality that leads to a deep power imbalance in society. And how do you even start to, address power imbalance? Well, you need something in the form of a structure of a union, a cooperative, whatever you want to call it, that joins regular working people together in solidarity. Because I promise you, as a single individual, you ain't taking on Musk, Zuckerberg, or Bezos, or any of these people alone. No chance, zero. But you can take on United Health Group as a solidarity effort. There's a bunch of you coming together, showing your power. So that's why we need good, healthy, strong unions. I've been a critic even of the union movement, saying we want democratic unions. For a long period of time, a lot of the union leaderships in a lot of places, Teamsters and UAW, were not even selected democratically. It was only until the last couple of years that we had the first ever democratically elected president of the United Auto Workers. His name is Shawn Fain. First ever in history. Think about that. How long UAW existed. Finally, we got a one person, one vote democratic effort that changed that union. And as a result, he got elected. Same with the Teamsters United for Democracy. They forced a movement within the Teamsters to allow, more democracy there. And Sean O'Brien rises out of that. But still to this day, there's a lot of effort still to undergo to make sure that the union heads are responsive to and represent a union membership. And in my view, this is where I maybe have a different view of some people in the union movement, is like, I want unions that represent the workers, not represent the Democratic Party. And increasingly, there's some people right at the top of unions who just, make political decisions and say, hey, I really want to be involved and influential with the president of the United States or with key Democratic leaders. And that's their number one priority and objective. I'm like, well, that should be a secondary or tertiary objective off of the primary one, is to represent your membership. When you're very strong, it comes from people. All going back to our first conversation, you represent people. And I get frustrated when there are union leaders who aren't close enough to what their locals and what some of their members are doing across the country. But at the end of the day, those union leaders, those people who are in this movement, are the best of America. I mean, I honestly say this kind of role, this kind of a function is so critical. We need people who have the courage and the desire and willingness to stand up to corporate power. You have no other really powerful avenues besides unions right now. If you were to look around, if you were to say, hey, who else can take on, Tesla or, United Health Group or any major corporation, it's going to be something in the form of a powerful union, to maybe even their pension funds or shareholder activism, but it's unions that are the drivers of it. So I hope that all of us can get invested in the desire for better, stronger unions, not just get cynical. You check out, you say, oh, screw government, screw unions, screw things that are building solidarity for working people or function. Literally, their purpose and mission is to function for working people. Don't give up on them. Invest in them to make them better and stronger.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to not be cynical in this time.
Yes.
Trump got reelected and it makes no sense. The fact that he was on the ticket at all makes no sense. But here we are. I have a question about what people are really looking for. I had a conversation just yesterday about the first responders, ski patrol in Park City being on strike over Christmas break.
Right.
And basically only 17% of the mountain could be open because there's going to be a liability for all the skiers. And people were like, oh my God, this is so terrible. What do they want anyway? So what do they want anyway? How would you explain that? Because one of the things I said, well, they should have better wages. And then somebody else at the table said, well, that's not going to be enough though, right? Because they're probably living an hour and a half away from Park City and have to commute. So we need housing. And it was the kind of thing where I thought for the first time, and I was surrounded by Republicans at this table, and I thought this was actually a more interesting conversation than I expected.
Right.
So if you had been there, what would you have said? What do these people want anyway?
Well, I was also heartened when those ski patrol folks went on strike that there were actually a number of people. I remember seeing some of these viral videos of regular people out there who were skiing and chanting, pay them more, give them fair wages or whatever it was, that like they were in solidarity with them. And that was heartening that there was actually a fair amount of contingent of people who recognized, a society works in solidarity with one another and they have some demands and knew what those demands were, and to say, hey, just raise them. I mean, at the point that I remember, and you correct me for my factual memory because now it's been a few months, I can't remember. Yeah. But it was like, it's a nominal increase in wages that they were after.
It was like $3 or something like that. I don't know exactly what it was, but I remember it was something small.
Right. And I think like in a lot of these, union negotiations, I appreciate sometimes their job is to fight for a very high number publicly, or to fight for, a North Star vision, and then trust that they can negotiate, right? Behind the scenes, they find what is a common ground. And if you ever get to a place where you say, hey, you think that they're being unreasonable in their demands, which is often the complaints made of unions, right? Because, you're unreasonable because you're shutting down service. Well, what other manner or method do they have to make a case and a point to you in which they could be heard and respected for making that. Oftentimes when you get to a strike, that was the last resort. They tried privately, they tried to petition.
Well, in this case, for example, with the Park City Ski Patrol, they had been in negotiations since April.
Yeah.
And they went on strike in December.
Right.
So to your point, like this is their last resort.
Exactly. And remember, a lot of the people, when they go on strike, they aren't doing it to hurt you.
Yes.
That's not their job. They're trying to take care of themselves and their lives, and to recognize there are very few things in our economy right now that are more courageous than doing that. It is very likely in a lot of these scenarios that these workers who fight for their basic living conditions will be fired, will be told they're being shut down, their plants are being shut down, their jobs are being moved to Mexico, and they have to earn the wrath of consumers, regular people, right? You were mentioning who are sitting around now, why the hell do they want everything and anything? Well, it turns out, though, thankfully, in this moment, you look at the approval of unions in America, it's never been higher. There is a solidarity ethic out there. It's not 100% across the board, but it's the vast majority of people who do recognize that the power of being in a solidarity effort to demand some fair dignity and recognition is needed, especially out of the pandemic, when I think a lot of people's minds got changed on this matter when they saw quote unquote essential workers being treated so harshly and unfairly and not given the opportunity to get just basic increases like we talked about, $2 or $3 of a wage increase, while a Kroger is walking away with the loot of billions of dollars in profits and doesn't want to share them back with its own workers. That becomes a real fundamental problem. To this day, corporate profits have never been higher. It is not a problem in our economy that we're suffering from corporate profits being too low. Like, corporate profits are very, very high. And the question is, do regular workers benefit at all from them? So I know that these conversations, when they feel like they're directly personal to you, I came here to ski and it's hurting me. I promise you, they're not trying to personally hurt you. They are, though, trying to get you to see and understand a cause that affects their lives pretty damn deeply.
Right. That's fair. But let's talk about how the Democratic Party is going to get there to represent the working class, because we've just discussed how Americans at large are pro-unions now, in a sense that they are now more pro-union than they ever have been. And I'm wondering what it's going to take for the party to change their mind, because this is, if you think about this being a marathon, like, what mile marker are we at? And also, what makes you believe that the Democratic Party will come to represent the working class one more time?
It's very hard to be a party of both billionaires and the working class who fights billionaires. It's hard to be both. You have to kind of make a choice. You have to say, here's definitionally who I am. It requires some friction. It may be uncomfortable. During the height of the Harris campaign, for instance, I was making criticisms of Mark Cuban being very out there. Not because I dislike Mark Cuban. I don't dislike, him being supportive of Kamala Harris. What I dislike is the idea that a billionaire represents the economic vision and views of the Democratic Party. I would much rather have like working class people or union heads being the voices of when Kamala Harris says we're going to go after predatory price gouging in our economy. I don't want to hear it from Mark Cuban. I don't want to hear him boiling it down. I don't want to hear him suggesting that this is a nice way to appeal to business. It won't bother them. Like, no. I want to hear from real people who are invested and understand that they are getting hurt by predatory price gouging. And we want aggressive corporate actions. That's a Democratic Party I want to see and believe in. And yet, you remember, we go and just go back to that Korsnick campaign, a number of the billionaires, name them by Reid Hoffman's and Barry Diller's, all the kinds of people coming out and saying, hey, Kamala Harris is nice to us. We're much better to us than Joe Biden. And no, that's where you have to face the choice. They don't speak for a Democratic Party. Our willingness and our desire to be in conflict with, not in a disrespectful, impersonal way, is to say we are a working class party. We are going to be engaged in certain actions that certain people in the wealthy class may not like or love. They may not like our antitrust action. They may not like our efforts to take on junk fees. But we're doubling down. We're tripling down on it because we fight for working class people. And we maintain our open door such that if Liz Cheney or any, Mark Cuban wants to join this party and fight alongside our cause, Great.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't get to take the cause, morph the cause, change the cause, such that the Democratic Party starts to lose its orientation with the roots of what we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Well said. I wish they had put Lina Khan everywhere because she really did the work. And I feel like, the proof is in the pudding. And instead, when Kamala Harris started campaigning with Liz Cheney, I was like, oh, what's happening?
Well,
What?
I'm glad you said Lena. Let's take her from a lot of people may not know who she is. She's the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission under Joe Biden that launched major antitrust investigations against Meta, fought the Kroger-Albertsons merger, tried to ban non-competes in the workplace, took on all kinds of junk fees, took on Amazon, whole bunches of actions that upset the corporate world and earned her the wrath. If you watch the Wall Street Journal editorial page, they went nuts about her, hated her. And it got to the point where such that when, Biden stepped away and Kamala Harris came in, the first ask of the billionaire class was to say, do not reappoint Lina Khan. And, sadly in that moment, during the course of the campaign, Harris refused to engage the question, just said, I'm not going to make any determinations of personnel, and left it open, left it amorphous and vague, and in that way invited kind of a billionaire lobbying effort against her. And when you're Lina Khan, when you're some of these government servants who use their powers appropriately to take on corporate power, they know they are opening themselves up for a slaughterhouse, right? There are going to be all kinds of lobbyists, all kinds of attacks on them. And they need champions. They need powerful champions who stand by them. And it was tough to not watch, some of the most powerful people not wanting to stand by them. And I'll remind everyone that one of the efforts of why the corporate world will go after Alina Khan or Rohit Chopra, so aggressively is they want every government servant to know that if you want to use your position like Lina Khan, you too will be attacked just like she is. And thankfully, she has the integrity to it doesn't phase her, it doesn't change her. She's going to keep doing what she's doing. She's going to stick to the law. But a lot of people, as will they're sitting in the Department of Energy or Department of Health and Human Services. They're watching her get attacked for just doing very basic things to go after, a large corporation to fight for working class people. And they're like, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to enlist. And that's the chilling effect that happens. And you have to send a message from the very top that says, I recognize and I support this kind of government service.
Yeah. Well, Lina Khan is an extraordinarily strong person. And I feel like, are we asking too much of civil servants to be able to be this kind of person when you're standing up for everyday Americans? And I mean, I'm thankful that Lina is the person that she is. But when you're saying other people don't want to put their necks out there, I totally get it, right? Because It's like, wait, I'm just doing my job. And I don't know whether I need to also do this other thing, be attacked. And so I feel like that's a question for everybody.
Right. That's certainly one of the reasons I started More Appropriate Union is to say, like, hey, I want to give you a platform and a perch to say why these people are doing such incredible work, to let you know and understand it. Because one of the things they're often dealing with is misinformation or disinformation against them because, wealthy people own the media. They own politicians. They can mount campaigns against you. Even Lena was getting attacked by Jim Jordan, the House Oversight Committee Republican, who was every day trying to subpoena information from her, trying to attack her. These are not comfortable roles to live in. But I do think that, while I respect and love Lena and I've known her for a while, it's not magical. I think there's lots of Lenas out there in the world. I firmly believe that. And you have to incentivize people saying, come into government service. It's a very valuable endeavor. A lot of people, as we were talking about before, feel cynical about government. Is it even worth my time? Can you even do anything? She was showing you, quite frankly, by rekindling powers that once were, that you can make these agencies constructive again, be useful, and do things. I think Pete Buttigieg, to a degree, was doing that with the Department of Transportation as well. But I think if you do that, if you set that notions from the top, you will find a lot of people out there in the world will come into government service saying, finally, I would be recognized, I would be defended, I would not be left to hang alone if I do very difficult things and go after big pharma or whatever the case might be.
Right.
So you have to set that culture, that kind of defense of them right at the top to recognize them. I mean, sadly, even Biden and Harris, they just didn't do enough to recognize some of their best enforcers in the
Right.
jobs that they were doing and why they were doing, whether they're at the IRS or the Security Exchange Commission or you name it. Like they need that backup and support from the political leadership.
Yeah. Well, we have the total opposite now. So I don't think anybody's going to join civil service anytime soon. We'll see how long the destruction will last.
They're not welcome there, right? They're being told
they're
to
not
get the hell
welcome.
out of
Yeah.
there. Yes.
Get the hell out.
Fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everybody's getting fired and shut down.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you this question. After this last presidential election, is centrism dead? Or maybe was centrism ever a real thing?
Well, it depends. Like people don't know these labels, right? Like what is centrism? And I think like if we're talking about centrism equals corporatism, then yeah, like that.
I think that's what people are.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. That's how people understand it. I
right.
think.
I mean, there's a different
or
world
being
of,
a party for both billionaires and working class people. Maybe that's centrism.
Right. If you talk to some centrists, like, oh, I'm center on identity politics. I'm center on immigration. I'm center on racial justice. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. I don't even know what that means, but sure. Like I can understand there's a spectrum of like how you might deal with trans issues in sports or whatever it might be. But on the issues of economic justice and corporatism, yeah, there's a fervent populism of the left and in the right that is joined together. If you listen to some of the things that Steve Bannon is saying nowadays, it sounds, like a populist left. He doesn't like massive cuts to Medicaid. He hates Elon Musk's influence over government. Right.
He likes Lila Khan.
Yeah, he likes Lila Khan.
Yes.
So, like people have equated this, I'm sure you've seen it online, as a horseshoe. Like somehow, there's a left and a right and they're somehow in these very far ends. I'm like, that's the wrong metaphor. It's more something akin to like a pyramid where centrism is the thing that's very much at the top and doesn't represent anybody and is up in the stratosphere, while the base of economic justice is this broad stroke from left to right on the ideological spectrum where tons and tons of people exist. That's actually what it is. It ain't a horseshoe. It isn't like we exist in little bits are there. It's the broad swath of American people across the board on corporate accountability, on pro-labor, pro-working class issues.
Oh, I like that. Thanks for sharing that analogy. So I have only 2 more questions.
Yes.
Every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guest to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. So what's a good way to turn the insights that you shared with us today into action?
Well, right now, obviously, the challenge is to confront everything that's going on with the administration, the rule of the billionaire class. And one of the hardest things for a lot of working class people to find out and figure out is the lobbyists work effectively because they know when key votes are going to take place, who's the powerful, influential factor, how best to influence this process. And we've had, as working class people, it's hard to unpack that. But I'm working, diligently. I'm trying to do it on my end, and I welcome everybody else trying to figure out and not give up. I think when I remember the 2010 Tea Party wave, you'll remember Obama came in very popular, and they fomented a national rebellion. And that was pretty successful if you looked at the 2010 election cycle for the Republican Party. We have that same opportunity now if we don't become disenchanted, because the stuff that Elon Musk is doing is not popular at all. So, number one,
start a new type of tea party, is what you're saying?
Essentially.
Yes.
Essentially. One that believes in government, of course, believes in the functions, not wants to dismantle it. But I think there's a couple of things. One is across America, there's probably local harms being felt by these cuts. And they don't get the attention necessarily that they deserve, but if you're a medical researcher at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, or at the Pittsburgh Medical Center, you're feeling these cuts. You're in the center of Missouri. You're feeling these cuts. You're a farmer. You're a Medicaid recipient. You're a Meals on Wheels administrator. You're a Head Start administrator. You're a park ranger in the Grand Canyon. These are all people feeling the impacts directly. One is to elevate those stories, know who they are, try to figure them out in your local community, nuclear safety workers. It's a really great time to educate all of us around the functions that governments do that are helpful to all of us, because we're going to start seeing those layoffs. The avian flu, right? I'm sure you saw this, right? People who were investigating bird flu, fired. Oh, now we need to rehire them. Yeah, because idiots who don't believe in government. That's what happens. And now it's an opportunity to educate everyone. These are people in our community who are doing government work. and do it for all of us, and we should respect it and show it the dignity that it deserves. And then, obviously, please be part of the national rebellion, a populist rebellion. There's no shortage of number of times to contact both your state representatives and your national representatives, your members of Congress and your senators, to say vote no. I mean, right now the math is such that if the Republicans are to try to pass their deep Medicaid cuts or the tax cuts for the rich through the House and the Senate. In the House, they only have a 2-vote margin at the current moment. That's going to be very
And there's special
hard.
elections in New York and in Florida, right?
100%.
But I don't know, it's it's exhausting to get these text messages to give $5. So honestly, I always say stop. But so I have no idea who's actually running. Actually, I think there's a farmer running for Elise Stefanik's seat in New York. I think it's a dairy farmer. I have seen his ad on Instagram.
I heard about
with
this
a
person.
cow.
Yes.
Yes. But I don't know who this person is, and I'm not in his district, so I can't vote for him. Right. So I'm a little bit tuned out, but probably I shouldn't be.
Money is one thing, but I'm urging people to just do the things that are for free, right? Write in a letter to the editor. Do all the basics of they have always been civic actions. You call your member of Congress, you write to them with a letter. Also, not only go to your members of Congress, you gather in civic organization. We were talking about this. Host a house party to invite some of your own colleagues in to wrestle together with collective actions that we could engage in. Like, no one person is going to brilliantly come up with all the answers here, but I bet if you put 15, 20, 30 people in a room together and said, what are certain things we could do? You're going to get some good answers, right? Challenge ourselves to do it that way. Collective wisdom.
Yeah, I like it. Last question. These are cynical times, we just mentioned. So looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
Well, I think in this moment, it's been, obviously tough for me personally around Bernie Sanders' campaigns, and like the moral arc of this universe is bending towards Bernie Sanders. Like every day, like the warning.
He would have won maybe in 2016 or in 2020. Yes. I don't know. I mean, 2016 was really tough,
right?
Yeah.
But his warnings of the oligarchy and the massive wealth and income inequality and the effects it would have on society, and they're coming to bear. And I do hope and believe that out of the darkness, it's always darkest before the dawn, that you get the consciousness raising. I mean, this is one thing we're already experiencing. I don't know if you're feeling the same thing, is that because of the pace and the aggressiveness and the overreach by the Trump administration, it is awakening a lot of people. It may not have stirred into a national protest or something, but it's awakening. The people are tuned, they are aware, it's bubbling. And I'm hoping that bubbling will come to a massive vote change in 2026 and ideally inspire two things I want to see happen. One is very competitive primaries on the Democratic side, like across the board, Democratic presidential primary in 2028, all kinds of Senate primaries, House primaries. But I also want to see working class candidates run. I want to see working class people run for office. Like, let's change the composition of the types of people. If you're somebody who just, your regular worker who, I've worked at Kellogg's for all my life, run for office. Or, you may think, I've just been running a civic organization or community-based organization. I've just been running this nonprofit. Like, get in. Now's the time. Let's change up the types of people running for office. I think more than ever, there's a desire for people, voters, to vote for candidates who don't come from traditional walks, are not like, oh, you worked in the state legislature and then you worked in House and then you worked in the Senate. Let's change the composition of our democratic republic and get working class people running.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you, Faiz, for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Faiz Shakir is the executive director of More Perfect Union. He formerly ran the Bernie 2020 campaign, served as the ACLU's national political director, and also served as senior advisor to the late Senator Harry Reid. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. First, don't give up on your aspirations in our democracy, and don't give up on movements that center everyday working people. Invest in community and stand in solidarity. And if you want to take it a step further, get up and run for office. We need a new crop of candidates, and that could be you. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Pete Davis. He's a writer and civic advocate working on civic projects aimed at deepening American democracy and solidarity. He's a co-founder of the Democracy Policy Network, a state policy organization focused on raising up ideas that deepen democracy. That's next week on Future Hindsight. Now, be sure to follow us on your podcast app. We're here every week with brand new episodes to help you stay engaged, and you don't want to miss a beat. Follow Future Hindsight now so we'll be in your rotation every week. And if you need that extra push, I know we all do, sign up for the newsletter at futurehindsight.com. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zach Travis and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.